My brother-in-law demanded a DNA test while my husband was lying in a coma. He wanted proof that my son was not his nephew so he could claim the inheritance. What the results revealed confirmed more than just paternity. My husband, Joel, was driving home from work on a Tuesday evening when a truck ran a red light and struck him on the driver's side. He was in surgery for 9 hours. The doctor explained that he had severe brain trauma and they could not predict when or if he would wake up. They advised me to prepare for the possibility that he might never recover. I sat beside his bed every day for 3 weeks. I held his hand and spoke to him about our son, Matty, who was 8 years old. I told him about Matty's soccer matches, his spelling tests, and how he asked about his dad every night before going to sleep. I played Joe's favorite music from my phone. I read him the sports section because he always joked that I never paid attention to basketball. I did everything I could think of to reach him. Joe's brother, Frank, came to the hospital on the 4th day. He stood in the doorway, looking at Joe connected to all the machines. He did not cry or show much emotion. Instead, he asked about Joel's life insurance policy. I told him I was not willing to discuss that while my husband was still fighting for his life. Frank replied that I was being unrealistic and that someone needed to think about practical issues. He pointed out that Joel had significant assets and that we had to decide who would manage them if he did not wake up. I asked him to leave. 3 days later, he returned with paperwork. He said he had consulted a lawyer about Joel's estate. As Joel's only sibling, he claimed he had concerns about the line of inheritance. He specifically mentioned doubts about Matty. I asked what possible concern he could have about an 8-year-old child. That was when Frank said he did not believe Matty was Joel's biological son. He argued that Matty did not resemble Joel, mentioning his darker hair and different eyes. He also suggested it was suspicious that I became pregnant soon after Joel and I started dating. According to him, I had trapped Joel with another man's child and was now attempting to take the family's money. For several moments, I could not respond. I simply looked at him standing there beside his unconscious brother, making those accusations. I asked if he truly came to the hospital to call me dishonest while Joel was in a coma. Frank said he was protecting Joel's legacy. He stated that Joel worked hard for his success and that he would not allow some woman and her child to take everything. He demanded a DNA test. He warned that if I refused, it would suggest I had something to hide. He even said he would seek a court order if necessary. He added that once he proved Matty was not Joel's son, he would petition to be named next of kin and take control of the assets. I told him to leave and warned him not to come near me or my son again. He replied that he would see me in court. 2 weeks later, Frank filed a petition. His lawyer argued that there was reasonable doubt regarding Matty's paternity and that a DNA test was required to determine the rightful inheritance. My attorney called it baseless, but the judge agreed to hear the case because it was presented as a matter of safeguarding Joel's estate. I was exhausted and angry. I was spending my days at the hospital and my nights worrying about my husband, and now I had to address this legal challenge. Still, I agreed to the DNA test. I agreed because I had nothing to conceal. I agreed because I wanted the matter resolved so I could focus on Joel. The test was conducted at a certified laboratory. They swabbed Matty's cheek and collected a sample from Joel at the hospital. Frank insisted on attending the procedure and observed the entire process confidently. 2 weeks later, we met at the lawyer's office to review the results. Frank sat across from me with his arms folded. His attorney opened the envelope and read the findings aloud. The DNA test confirmed with 99.97% certainty that Joel was Matty's biological father. Frank's expression changed immediately. He took the document and read it several times, insisting there must be an error or that the samples had been switched. His lawyer informed him the results were definitive and left no grounds for appeal. That could have been the end of it. However, while preparing for the case, my lawyer discovered additional information. Joel had written an earlier will before our marriage, leaving 40% of his estate to Frank. But after Matty was born, Joel updated his will. The revised version left everything to me and Matty. Frank was not included. Frank was unaware of this change. He believed he would still receive 40%, even if Maddie was confirmed as Joel's son. My lawyer handed him a copy of the current will. As he read it, his hands began to shake. He stood upright, gathered his briefcase without speaking, and walked toward the door. He paused briefly, then left. My lawyer calmly explained that Frank no longer had any legal standing. The DNA results were clear and the will was valid. There was nothing further he could contest. He advised me to return my focus to my husband and son while he handled any additional issues. I left feeling more drained than relieved. During the drive back to the hospital, I thought about Frank's reaction. For a moment, I felt a trace of sympathy, but it faded when I remembered his words about my son. When I entered Joel's room, nothing had changed. The machines continued their steady sounds. The ventilator breathed for him. I sat beside him and held his hand. I told him about the meeting and assured him that our family was protected. Yet the legal victory felt insignificant while he remained unconscious. That evening, I returned home and found Maddie at the kitchen table finishing homework. My mother had stayed with him during the day. After she left, Maddie looked at me seriously and asked if Uncle Frank had not visited the hospital. I chose my words carefully. I explained that Uncle Frank had made poor decisions and said hurtful things. I told him that because of those choices, he would not be around for a while. Maddie nodded slowly and asked if Uncle Frank was angry with us. I said he was dealing with his own issues and that sometimes adults make mistakes when they're afraid. Maddie quietly accepted the explanation, though I could see he was thinking deeply. I hugged him and assured him that things would be all right. 3 days later, I was in Joel's room reading aloud when Dr. Cook entered with a noticeably different expression. She reviewed his chart and informed me that the brain swelling had significantly decreased. The latest scan showed meaningful improvement. They planned to reduce his sedation to see if he would respond. She cautioned that there were no guarantees, but the signs were encouraging. I felt a surge of cautious hope. After she left, I called my friend Mariana and told her the update. She said she would come immediately. I needed support for what might happen next. A week passed after they reduced the sedation, but Joel did not wake up. The doctor said this was not unusual and urged patience, though each day felt long. One night at 11 p.m., my phone rang. It was Frank. I hesitated before answering. His voice sounded strained. He admitted he did not expect forgiveness. He spoke about always feeling inferior to Joel and panicking after the accident. He said he feared being left with nothing and acted out of desperation. He acknowledged that what he did was wrong. I interrupted him. I told him that his insecurity did not justify insulting my son or attempting to claim the inheritance while Joel was fighting for his life. I said his actions were unacceptable and I was not interested in hearing excuses. He was silent for a moment, then quietly asked if Joel was improving. I realized he had not received any updates. The rest of the family had distanced themselves from him. I told him the doctors were hopeful, but we were still waiting. I told him Joel's brain swelling had decreased and the doctors were trying to bring him out of the coma. Frank made a sound as if he was crying or struggling to hold it back. He said he was sorry, repeating it several times as though repetition could make it meaningful. I replied that an apology did not change anything and ended the call. 2 weeks later, the hospital social worker asked to meet with me. Her name was Olivia. She was kind, but her role required her to discuss finances. We sat in a small office near Joel's room and she showed me documents filled with numbers. She explained that even with Joel's insurance, the expenses were increasing quickly. The ICU care, treatments, and future rehabilitation would likely cost between $30,000 and $40,000 out of pocket. I looked at the figures and felt overwhelmed. It was an enormous amount. Olivia noticed my reaction and gently reassured me that Joel's estate could cover these costs. She explained that this was precisely the purpose of an estate. That was when I realized how serious Frank's actions had been. If he had succeeded in court, I would not have had access to Joel's funds for his own medical care. I would have faced significant debt while he controlled everything. Olivia continued outlining payment options and assistance programs, but I was focused on how close we had come to financial disaster. 2 weeks after they reduced Joel's sedation, I entered his room for my usual morning visit. Dr. Cook was already there, reviewing his monitors. I sat in my regular chair and observed quietly. Then I noticed Joel's eyes move. At first I thought I imagined it, but they shifted again and opened slightly, following the light Dr. Cook was using. She reacted immediately and began assessing his responses. She shone the light in his eyes, and they tracked it. She asked him to squeeze her hand, and his fingers responded. The movement was faint, but it was clear. I began crying without intending to. Tears fell as Dr. Cook continued testing and speaking to him. She asked him to squeeze my hand, and I felt a slight pressure. It was minimal, but it was unmistakable. He was regaining awareness. The following day, I brought Maddie to see his father awake for the first time. As we walked down the hallway, I explained that his dad was conscious, but still very weak. I prepared him for the possibility that Joe might not speak yet and might look different. Maddie nodded, but when we reached the doorway, he stopped. He stood there, looking at Joel in the hospital bed with his eyes open. Then he began to cry and stepped back. He refused to enter the room. I tried encouraging him gently, but he shook his head and continued crying. We returned home, and he avoided discussing it. That evening, he finally broke down. He climbed into my lap, even though he was nearly too big, and cried against my shoulder. He told me he had been having nightmares about his dad dying almost every night. He admitted he was afraid to feel happy about his father waking up because he feared something else could go wrong. He said losing hope the first time had hurt deeply, and he did not want to experience that pain again. I held him and reassured him that fear was understandable. I explained that hope can be frightening, but it is still necessary. The next week, Mariana called and told me she had organized support from other parents at Maddie's school. They arranged a meal schedule so families could bring us dinner. I told her it was not required, but she said everything was already arranged. That same week, Joel's mother, Lily, called to say she was driving 8 hours to stay with us. She insisted that the family needed to be together. I tried to explain that we were managing, but she did not accept that. She arrived 2 days later with suitcases and groceries. She immediately commented that I looked exhausted and had lost weight. She reminded me that accepting help was not weakness. She said I had carried the burden alone for too long, and it was time to allow others to share it. I did not argue. I allowed her to handle meals, cleaning, and household tasks. I accepted the meals from friends. I acknowledged that I could not manage everything on my own. Joel's recovery progressed slowly over the next 3 weeks. He was able to sit up without assistance. He could feed himself using his right hand, although his left hand still trembled. A speech therapist worked with him daily to improve his clarity. Some days showed progress, other days were frustrating when his speech did not match his thoughts. I remained by his side throughout. Maddie began visiting twice a week. He still kept some distance from the bed, but entered the room. He stood near the doorway and shared updates about school and soccer practice. Joe would smile and nod, even when speaking tired him. 3 weeks after Joe first opened his eyes, I walked into the hospital waiting area and saw Frank sitting in one of the chairs near the entrance. I stopped immediately. He looked up and stood slowly. He appeared physically worn. His face was thinner, his clothes looser, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He seemed older and visibly strained. I approached him cautiously, prepared to call security if necessary. He raised both hands slightly, signaling he meant no harm. He told me he had started therapy to understand his behavior. He said he needed to confront how jealousy had damaged his relationship with his only brother. He explained that he wanted to apologize to Joel directly. I questioned why I should trust him after everything that had happened. He responded that he did not expect trust. He only wanted the opportunity to say he was sorry. After considering it carefully, I told him he could visit Joel for 15 minutes with me present the entire time. If Joel asked him to leave, he would have to do so immediately without argument. Frank agreed. We walked down the hallway in silence. I entered Joel's room first. Joel was sitting up in bed watching television with the volume low. He looked toward the door when he heard it open. His eyes moved from me to Frank standing behind me. Recognition was clear,
followed by a firm and distant expression I had never seen directed at his brother. Frank stepped inside slowly and stopped a few feet from the bed. His hands were shaking. He struggled to speak at first, then said he was sorry. He admitted that jealousy had changed him into someone he did not recognize. He explained that when Joe was unconscious, he panicked about being left with nothing. He acknowledged that fear did not justify his actions. He admitted accusing me was wrong, and convincing himself Joel always received everything fueled his anger. His voice broke when he addressed the word he used for Maddie. He said he would regret that statement for the rest of his life. Joel listened without interrupting. His expression remained firm as Frank spoke. When Frank finished, there was a long pause. Then Joel spoke in a weak but steady voice. He asked Frank why he believed he deserved Joel's money more than Joel's own son. Frank began to cry and admitted he had no valid answer. He said he had been wrong about everything. Joel watched him quietly. His expression softened slightly, but the pain was still visible in his eyes.
Joel told Frank he needed time to decide whether their relationship could be repaired. He made it clear that, regardless of that decision, Frank would never be involved in matters concerning Maddie or the family estate. Those boundaries, he said, were permanent. Frank wiped his face and nodded. He said he understood and would respect whatever Joel chose. He took a piece of paper from his pocket and placed it on the bedside table, explaining that it contained his contact information in case Joel ever wanted to reach out. Before leaving, he apologized to me as well. He admitted that an apology was not enough, but said he meant it. Then he walked out. I sat beside Joel's bed. He stared at the closed door for a long moment before asking if I believed Frank was sincere. I told him I wasn't sure. People can change, I said, but real change requires more than words. Joel nodded and closed his eyes. The following week, once doctors confirmed he could sit up steadily, physical therapy began. I watched through the window as the therapist helped Joel stand for the first time. He gripped the walker tightly. His legs trembled. He took one step and nearly fell, but the therapist supported him. On the second attempt, he managed 3 steps before losing strength. By the end of the session, he walked 10 feet with assistance. 10 feet. It was progress, but it showed how far he still had to go. Afterward, the therapist explained that recovery would require months of consistent work. Some mobility limitations might be permanent. Balance and coordination would need ongoing support. She advised us to prepare for a long process. I thanked her and returned to Joel's room. He looked exhausted. He asked how it appeared from my perspective. I told him it looked like progress. He gave a small smile, though frustration was visible in his eyes. The next week, Maddie began weekly sessions with Clara, a child therapist specializing in medical trauma within families. After the first 2 appointments, he came home quiet and went straight to his room. After the 3rd session, something shifted. During dinner, he set down his fork and said he was afraid to feel happy about his dad improving in case something bad happened again. He explained that Clara was helping him understand that avoiding disappointment can also block happiness. He said he was trying to allow himself to feel hopeful, even though it was uncomfortable. I reached across the table and told him I was proud of him for speaking openly. He squeezed my hand and continued eating. It was a simple moment, but meaningful. By the 5th week, Joel's cognitive abilities had improved enough for deeper conversations. One evening, after Maddie went to bed, we discussed Frank's betrayal. Joel spoke about the pain of being vulnerable and discovering that his brother had tried to take advantage of the situation. Tears ran down his face. He said he always sensed Frank's resentment, but never imagined it could become so harmful. He needed time to grieve the relationship he thought they had. He acknowledged that the Frank who apologized seemed different from the one who demanded the DNA test, but he was unsure whether that change was lasting. I listened without telling him what he should feel. He needed space to process.
A few days later, Duncan called the hospital room. I answered and held the phone to Joel's ear since his left hand was still unsteady. Duncan said he had cut off contact with Frank until Frank demonstrated genuine change through consistent actions. He emphasized that apologies are simple, but sustained behavioral change is difficult. He would not allow Joel to be hurt again. Joel thanked him for the support. He said he might forgive Frank eventually, even if their relationship never returned to its former state. Holding on to anger, he explained, consumed energy he needed for healing. Duncan said he respected that decision. 10 weeks after the accident, Joel was cleared to return home. He required outpatient therapy 3 times a week and visits from a home health aide. I spent 2 days reorganizing the house. Furniture was moved to create wider pathways. Grab bars were installed in the bathroom. I purchased a shower chair. We relocated our bedroom to the first floor since stairs were not yet manageable. I felt both relief and anxiety. Having Joel home was encouraging, but his care needs were significant. Mariana came over the day before his discharge and helped me finish preparations. She assured me I would manage. I hoped she was right. Joel arrived home in a wheelchair, though he could walk short distances with his walker. Maddie waited on the porch. When Joel came up the ramp, Maddie began to cry. He wanted to hug him, but was afraid of hurting him. Joel embraced him carefully, and they both cried quietly. Inside, we settled him into the downstairs bedroom. Even the short trip home exhausted him. He slept most of that first day. When awake, he required breaks between small tasks. Walking to the bathroom was tiring. Eating lunch took effort. That night, we lay beside each other for the first time in 3 months. Joel remained on his back because his ribs were still healing. He reached for my hand and thanked me for protecting our family while he couldn't. I told him we protected each other. We had both carried burdens alone, and now we could begin sharing them again. The following morning, I woke to the sound of his walker moving across the floor. He was attempting to reach the bathroom independently. I followed him into the hallway. He said he wanted to do it alone. We compromised. I walked behind him without touching unless necessary. It took nearly 5 minutes to cover 15 feet. When he reached the bathroom, he was breathing heavily. I waited outside until he finished, then helped him back to bed. He fell asleep almost immediately. Downstairs, Maddie asked if his dad was okay. I said he was simply tired from walking. I noticed that Maddie had begun sleeping with his bedroom door open to listen for sounds at night. Physical therapy sessions structured our week. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I helped Joel dress and drove him to appointments. After each session, he needed at least 2 hours of rest. The medical bills continued despite insurance coverage. Co-pays and deductibles added up. About 3 weeks after returning home, Joel attempted to walk to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. I saw him halfway down, and concern rose immediately because the driveway sloped downward. He asked me to let him do it himself. I stayed a few steps behind. He made it there and back safely. Once inside, he sat down and cried. He used to run 5 miles every Saturday. Now, retrieving mail exhausted him. I reminded him that 3 weeks ago, he could not sit up unassisted. Progress was happening, even if slowly. 4 months after the accident, Gregory informed us that all estate matters were finalized. Medical expenses were paid from Joel's accounts, and insurance settlements were processed. Financial stability brought relief. While ongoing therapy and medication costs remained, the uncertainty had eased. I could focus on Joel's recovery without constant fear of losing our home. 5 months after the accident, I was folding laundry while Joel napped and Maddie was at school. I looked around and saw how our home had transformed. The walker by the couch, medications on the counter, therapy schedules on the refrigerator, grab bars in the bathroom. Yet Maddie's soccer trophy still stood on the shelf. Our life had changed, but it was still ours. I realized I had developed strengths I did not know I possessed. I had defended our family legally while Joel was unconscious. I had managed finances and medical logistics. I had supported Maddie emotionally while handling my own fear. I had learned to accept help and to set firm boundaries. 6 months after the accident, on a Tuesday morning, I watched from the kitchen window as Joel walked Maddie to the bus stop, using only a cane. He moved slowly but steadily. They stood together at the corner. Joel placed his hand on Maddie's shoulder. When the bus arrived, Maddie hugged him before boarding. Joel waved until the bus disappeared, then walked back home on his own. I met him at the door. He was smiling, a genuine smile I had not seen in months. We had endured the worst period of our lives. Joel would never be exactly the same. Maddie would always remember nearly losing his father. I would always remember the betrayal and the fight to protect my family. But we were moving forward together, with clarity about what truly matters when everything else is stripped away.